Leaving Elena in that bistro was the closing of one door and the violent kicking open of another. I did not feel lighter as I walked away. I did not feel the sudden, sweeping absolution that revenge is supposed to grant you. Instead, I felt a cold, mechanical hyper-focus. The parasitic appendage of my past had been severed, leaving me entirely free to hunt the apex predator. Elena was suffering, yes. But her suffering was merely a byproduct of her own greed. Julian Sterling's suffering needed to be a masterpiece of architectural ruin. I wasn't just going to break his heart or his ego. I was going to dismantle the very foundation that allowed him to be a monster. I was going to strip him of his wealth, his name, and his freedom. And I was going to do it using the very skills he had once deemed trivial. In my first life, Julian had forced me to abandon my business. He had mocked my late nights spent organizing digital files, formatting presentations, and drafting contracts. He had viewed my administrative work as peasant labor, entirely beneath a sterling wife. In this life, that peasant labor was the engine of his destruction. My agency, Nova Digital Solutions, had grown into a formidable, silent machine. I was no longer just a freelancer. I was the unseen manager of a highly efficient, global operation. I had spent the last year meticulously creating comprehensive training materials and presentations to help my team of virtual assistants improve their performance and handle complex, high-level corporate tasks. We managed everything from elite document editing and graphic design to handling intricate patient rebills for massive private medical networks. We were indispensable to our clients, and the revenue stream was a raging river. I used that money to wage a shadow war. Julian's arrogance was his Achilles heel. Because he believed he was a god, he believed his sins were invisible. But I had been his wife. I had sat silently in the passenger seat of his Aston Martin while he took furious, unguarded phone calls. I had organized his home office. I remembered the names of the offshore shell companies. I remembered the dates of the charity transfers that miraculously lined the pockets of local politicians. I remembered the exact, complex web of embezzlement he ran through the Sterling Foundation to fund his private vices. I didn't need to break into his computer to find the evidence. I just needed to know where to point the people who could. Using secure, untraceable servers funded by my agency, I hired 3 of the most ruthless, high-end corporate private investigators in Europe. I didn't give them my name. I communicated strictly through heavily encrypted emails, paying them exorbitant retainers in cryptocurrency. I gave them the breadcrumbs, the name of a holding company in the Caymans, a specific discrepancy in the Foundation's tax filings from 3 years ago, a list of heavily redacted property deeds. I told them to pull the thread. While the investigators were quietly assembling the financial noose, I had one final, vital loose end to tie up. A debt to the universe that had to be paid before the fire consumed the Sterling estate. Elias, the memory of the young, neurodivergent groundskeeper being dragged away in handcuffs, sobbing in confusion as he was framed for my murder, was the true catalyst for this entire timeline. I could not, and would not, let Julian's inevitable collateral damage touch him in this life. It took me a week of careful surveillance to intercept him. I parked my car half a mile down the road from the service entrance of the Sterling estate in Connecticut and waited until his shift ended. When Elias finally emerged, walking down the dusty shoulder of the road with his head bowed, the sight of him struck a deep, resonant chord of grief in my chest. He looked exactly the same, quiet, solitary, lost in his own world, entirely innocent of the vicious, bloodthirsty environment he worked in. I pulled my car over slowly and rolled down the passenger window. "Elias?" I called out softly, making sure to keep my voice calm and non-threatening. He jumped slightly, his hands gripping the straps of his worn backpack. He looked at my car, his eyes darting away instantly, avoiding direct eye contact as he always did. He didn't recognize me. In this timeline, I had barely spoken to him, having severed my ties with the Sterlings before his kindness was ever needed. "Yes, ma'am," he mumbled, shifting his weight nervously. "My name is Patricia," I said, offering a warm, gentle smile. "I run a digital administration company in the city. A colleague of mine mentioned that you have an incredible eye for detail and a passion for horticulture." He blinked, looking at the door handle of my car, clearly confused. I just take care of the roses, mostly. And the weeping willows. "I know," I said softly. "Listen, Elias, the people you work for, they aren't safe. The Sterling estate is going to be undergoing a lot of massive, very loud, very chaotic changes soon. It won't be a good environment for you. I have a client who owns a massive private botanical sanctuary upstate. They need an assistant grounds manager. The pay is triple what Arthur Sterling gives. They offer full benefits, and you get a cottage on the property. Quiet, just you and the plants. Elias finally looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and hesitant hope. A cottage? With the plants? Yes, I nodded, reaching across the seat to hand him a thick envelope. Inside was a contract I had personally drafted, pristine and legally ironclad, along with a cashier's check for $10,000 as a relocation bonus. This is real, Elias. Take the envelope. Pack your things tonight. The address and the contact information are inside. Tell them Patricia sent you. Do not go back to the Sterling estate tomorrow. He took the envelope with trembling fingers, looking at the heavy, official documents inside. The sheer, uncomplicated gratitude that washed over his face was the first genuinely pure thing I had witnessed in 3 years. Thank you, he whispered, clutching the envelope to his chest. Thank you, ma'am. Take care of the roses, Elias, I said softly. I watched him walk away in the rearview mirror until he was just a speck on the horizon. The scapegoat was off the board. The innocent soul was safe. I put the car in drive, the final weight lifting from my shoulders. Now, the slaughter could begin in earnest. 2 months later, my investigators delivered the payload. It was a masterclass in forensic accounting. They had uncovered a staggering, undeniable paper trail of fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion that went directly to Julian's personal accounts. He had been skimming millions off the top of the Sterling Foundation's charitable grants and hiding the assets to avoid taxation, forging Arthur Sterling's signature on key documents to bypass the board of directors. It was enough to send a normal man to federal prison for 30 years. But Julian wasn't a normal man. I needed to ensure he couldn't buy his way out. I needed the court of public opinion to burn his effigy before he even saw a judge. I spent 3 sleepless nights utilizing every ounce of my document editing and digital administration expertise. I cross-referenced the investigators' findings, compiling an airtight, heavily indexed, digital dossier. It was beautiful, damning, and completely unassailable. On a Tuesday morning, precisely at 8 a.m., I used a masked VPN to simultaneously email the encrypted dossier to the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the tip lines of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. Then, I closed my laptop, poured myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, and turned on the news. The explosion was instantaneous and catastrophic. By noon, Sterling Foundation embezzlement was the #1 trending topic worldwide. By 2 p.m., trading on Sterling real estate stock was halted after a devastating 40% plunge. The anchors on the financial networks looked pale and breathless as they read the leaked documents live on air, outlining the sheer, audacious scale of Julian's crimes. But the true genius of the trap lay in the paranoia of a sociopath. Julian was a control freak. When a control freak loses control of the narrative, they do not look for external enemies, they look for internal betrayal. The documents leaked were highly sensitive. They were files that only someone with intimate, unrestricted access to Julian's home office and personal servers could have procured. Someone like his wife. I knew exactly what was happening in the Sterling penthouse as the news broke. I knew because I had lived with that monster when his temper flared over a spilled glass of wine. I could only imagine the terrifying, earth-shattering violence that was currently possessing him as his empire evaporated before his eyes. At 4 p.m., the FBI raided the Sterling Real Estate corporate headquarters. The footage of federal agents carrying boxes of hard drives out of the glass and steel skyscraper was broadcast on every channel. At 4:30 p.m., I picked up my burner phone. I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher asked. I pinched my nose slightly, altering the resonance of my voice, making it sound breathless and panicked. Please, you have to send someone to the Sterling penthouse at the Grand Plaza. I live down the hall. There is screaming. A woman is screaming, and things are smashing. He's going to kill her. Please hurry. I hung up, snapped the burner phone in half, and dropped it into a cup of water. I sat on my velvet sofa and watched the television. It took 30 minutes for the local news helicopters to redirect their cameras from the corporate headquarters to the Grand Plaza penthouse. The footage was aerial, looking down at the massive, wraparound terrace of the apartment I had once called a prison. I watched as 3 squad cars screeched to a halt outside the lobby. I watched as the minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow. And then, I saw them emerge onto the terrace. Julian was dragged out by 3 police officers. He was handcuffed, his bespoke suit torn, his face a mask of rabid, feral fury. He was shouting, fighting against the officers' grips, looking entirely unhinged. A moment later, paramedics wheeled a stretcher out onto the terrace. I leaned forward, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The camera zoomed in. It was Elena. She was conscious, but barely. Her face was a bruised, swollen ruin. Her arm was strapped awkwardly across her chest. As the paramedics loaded her into the elevator, the camera caught a brief, terrifying glimpse of the red, angry marks wrapping entirely around her throat. Julian had blamed her for the leak. He had assumed that the woman who was cunning enough to steal her best friend's fiancé was cunning enough to sell him out to the feds to secure her own golden parachute. In his blinding rage, the monster had surfaced completely, and he had nearly finished the job he started on me 3 years ago. But the police had arrived in time. He hadn't managed to crack her skull against the marble. She would live. Julian Sterling was arrested on live television for felony domestic assault, battery, and attempted murder, all while the FBI seized his assets for massive financial fraud. The golden boy of high society was dead. In his place stood a violent, broke, disgraced criminal facing decades in federal lockup. The cage was finally, permanently shut. It has been 2 years since the fall of the House of Sterling. The trial was a media circus of epic proportions. Arthur Sterling tried to use his wealth to shield his son, but the paper trail I had meticulously formatted and leaked was too damning, and the optics of a battered wife on the witness stand were impossible to overcome. Julian's defense attorneys tried to paint Elena as a hysterical, money-hungry liar who provoked him, but the prosecution simply played the 911 tape and showed the jury the photographs of her throat. Julian Sterling was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 25 years for the financial crimes, and an additional 15 for the assault and attempted murder of his wife. He will be an old, forgotten man by the time he ever breathes free air again. As for Elena, the divorce was swift, but it was not lucrative. The FBI had frozen the majority of the Sterling assets. Arthur Sterling, furious at the disgrace she had brought upon his family, ensured she walked away with absolutely nothing but a shattered reputation and a mountain of medical debt. She lives in a small, cramped apartment in a borough she would have scoffed at 3 years ago. She works a minimum wage retail job, hiding the permanent scars on her collarbone beneath high-necked shirts. The high society friends who had fawned over her at her wedding pretend she doesn't exist. She got the man, she got the ring, and she paid the ultimate price. I do not check on her anymore. I do not care. I am writing this from the balcony of a villa I rented for the month in the Amalfi Coast. The Mediterranean sun is warm against my skin. Inside, my laptop is open, my agency is thriving, and my team of virtual assistants is seamlessly handling the operations of a multi-million-dollar digital empire. I am wealthy. I am untouchable. I am alive. Some nights, when the wind howls and the house is quiet, the ghost of my former self visits me. The naive, empathetic girl who died on a cold marble floor stares at me with wide, terrified eyes. She asks me how I can sleep at night. She asks me if I am truly any better than the monster I locked away, given that I used another woman's body as bait to trap him. I look at that ghost, and I do not apologize. I pour myself a glass of wine. I touch the smooth, unblemished skin of my own throat, and I tell her the truth. I am not a hero. I never claimed to be one. Heroes are martyrs who bleed for the sins of others. Heroes are the ones who get strangled in the dark while the world looks the other way. I am a survivor. I am the architect of my own salvation. And if the price of my life was the soul of the woman who laughed at my pain, I would pay it again, and again, and again. I took the second ring, I forged it into a blade, and I handed it to the devil. And then, I walked away.